Tonight, the fight over the Mueller report heating up. More subpoenas being ignored as the White House tries to flex its muscles. A former federal prosecutor joins us to analyze what could happen next as things get even more contentious. Then, a battle over free speech. Facebook, they banned several controversial people, including Alex Jones of InfoWars, Louis Farrakhan of the Nations of Islam. We will take a look at whether or not this is overdue here or a slippery slope in the social media world. Also, climate change, it isn't endangering just humans. 1 million species are at risk of total extinction. 1 million. That according to a new report from the UN committee. One of the scientists who worked on that report will join us tonight. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening. Now, we begin tonight with the battle over the Mueller report, which is now taking place on multiple fronts. Now, let's first start with the Attorney General William Barr. Tomorrow morning, the House Judiciary Committee will vote on whether to hold Barr in contempt of Congress. House Democrats, they're demanding the entire unredacted Mueller report. Barr saying no. Then there is the former White House counsel, Don McGahn. He is refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena demanding documents related to the Mueller probe. The White House, they told him to disregard the demand from the House Democrats, and so far, he's listening to his former boss. Don't forget that McGahn spent 30 hours with Mueller's team, so he's considered potentially a pivotal player. As well, there is Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. The Treasury denying requests from House Democrats for Donald Trump's tax returns. Now, this could set up for a long, hard legal battle. And then there is, of course, Bob Mueller himself. The Attorney General said it is fine with him if Mueller testifies before Congress. But now, the president doing a 180. Trump doesn't want Mueller to appear. And as I said, it's a reversal. He used to say he was fine with Mueller heading up to Capitol Hill. Also, a lot of Trump's senior advisors are attempting to downplay that very tweet. Politico reporting that they were caught off guard by the president's statement. They're also saying Trump doesn't intend to invoke executive privilege to block Mueller from appearing, but, as they say, we shall see. Plus, we have more and more former federal prosecutors signing on to a document saying that if Trump were a regular citizen, he would have been charged with obstruction. Now, bear in mind, these are people from multiple administrations and from both political parties. The letter now has around 700 signatures, and I want to read a portion of it for you. Quote, each of us believes that the conduct of President Trump described in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report would, in the case of any other person not covered by the Office of Legal Counsel policy against indicting a sitting president, result in multiple felony charges for obstruction of justice. And again, just as a reminder to you, all of the instances of possible obstruction spelled out in the Mueller report are on your screen as we speak. Now, on the Senate floor, each side digging in. Here's Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
It's been 2 weeks since Attorney General William Barr made the 450-page report public. This investigation went on for 2 years. It's finally over.
He doesn't want to move on. He wants to run away from these awful facts that relate to the wellspring of our democracy: foreign interference in our election and a president who is lawless.
Now, McConnell says this thing's over, but it does not feel that way. Harry Litman, he joins us now. He's a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General appointed by President Clinton and also a former federal prosecutor. Harry's also the creator and executive producer of the new podcast, Talking Feds. And Harry, I want to start off with that letter that has now in the neighborhood of 700 signatures. Yours wasn't one of them, but as I understand it, that's only because you're an op-ed writer for the Washington Post and you're precluded. If not for that, would your name be on that document as well?
Yeah, it certainly would. I mean, the document, first of all, it's a phenomenal number of former prosecutors. There aren't that many. It's not like state prosecutors in the whole country. And I've never seen such an avalanche of folks. And the letter itself is particularly strong, Richard. It doesn't simply say on balance it would happen this way. It says we emphasize it's not really even a close call professionally. This is objective and on the merits. And what it essentially means is the final kind of turnaround that Barr attempted to do to pull the rug out from under Mueller's findings just does not represent a credible professional judgment. These are the folks who year in, year out, a dozen years, 20 years, have prosecuted exactly these cases. They know exactly what obstruction is. Bill Barr, of course, has zero prosecutorial experience. It's a really important document that essentially gives the lie to the notion that Mueller did not find conduct that amounts to obstruction.
It all brings us to the question of what is the role of the legislative branch here? And is, in effect, the executive branch and the president above the law? To that end, about not answering subpoenas and everything else, I saw a really interesting piece that James Reston wrote in the Times talking about the eerie parallel to Watergate. And I want to play a clip for folks taking us back to Watergate. And people forget, there was a third article of impeachment that wasn't pivotal at the end of the day because Nixon resigned after the tapes and everything else. But nonetheless, Barbara Jordan, who was a member of the Judiciary Committee in the House, this is what she had to say in Congress.
The Constitution charges the President with the task of taking care that the laws be faithfully executed. And yet, the President has counseled his aides to commit perjury, willfully disregard the secrecy of grand jury proceedings, conceal surreptitious entry, attempt to compromise a federal judge, while publicly displaying his cooperation with the processes of criminal justice. A president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution.
Now, you take that, Harry, and you fast forward to where we are now, 45 years later, and it's really the same basic question, which is, do we have, in effect, a branch, the president, that isn't accountable to the law, doesn't have to turn over documents, doesn't have to, either himself or his people, if he so deigns, answer questions of Congress? You know, is he, in effect, above the law? They took it very seriously back then. Why is there a difference then and now? What has happened?
Yeah, I mean, that is so much the $64,000 question. First of all, I forgot what a stirring rhetorician Barbara Jordan was. That was really great to hear. But there, by any account, Richard, the span and the nature of the conduct that Mueller has found now as a fact is more grave and broader than was the case with Nixon, and also very similar in its core. So Nixon wanted to fire and did fire, in fact, the special counsel. It's precisely what Trump tried to order McGahn to do. And by the way, obstruction is still obstruction whether or not you succeed. Trump similarly tried to limit the probe and many more things. So what is going on? I mean, one obvious point is that we didn't have the same impacted parties and the same sort of Mitch McConnell obdurate Republican in 1972. And what seems to have happened here is you have this very narrow governing wedge representing both the base of Trump and then the governing party that simply wants to see no evil, hear no evil, and say no evil in the clear face of conduct that it just can't be denied is of a piece with, if not more grave than what Nixon did. So I think we have a crassness of party politics now that we didn't have back then. Is it a fundamental change in America, or just the way the sort of numbers played out now versus the default in Watergate? And also the fact, of course, Nixon, for all his faults, was something of a serious institutional person with some respect for the presidency. Trump has none, and so there's a shamelessness to Trump's both conduct and defense of the conduct that even Nixon would not have been nearly brazen enough to proffer.
You know, Harry, I'll try and see if I can put this in a coherent sense. For the last couple of years, while people's heads have been exploding and over too many issues to count. I understood the outrage over the tonal debasement or even on policy fronts or whatever else. But I believed that the brilliance of the Founding Fathers and the construct of the pillars with the checks and balances were such that nobody, even with the worst of intentions, could do so much that they couldn't be reined in. And even in the last week, after the Mueller report came down and the no across the board to anything, and the Attorney General, frankly, in my estimation, acting how he has, and then the president outwardly talking about 2 years being stolen from him, and maybe I won't leave so willingly if the results don't go my way in 2020. For the first time, I'm starting to say, wait a second, this isn't just, a bad clown car. Now you're talking about basic rules of governance that we have always taken for granted. And if you can survive this, why wouldn't someone try something in 2020? Am I being too alarmist? Because I wasn't in the camp saying, oh my God, this is democracy is going out the window. I said, please, give a little bit more credit to how this thing has been built here for as long as it has. For the first time, I'm starting to wonder if there's not going to be pushback by both parties. What are we inviting here?
Yeah, I don't think you are being too alarmist. This clown car, is leading us into a potential giant crash. You could really see, for about a couple days, people wondered, would Nixon leave peaceably? And it was kind of the ultimate triumph of the constitutional democracy in the wake of Watergate that, in fact, he did, and there was a peaceful transition. Trump breaks all the rules, and you can really see him trying to lock himself in the office. But on your broader point, I've thought a lot about it. This gets a little arcane, but what the hell would Madison and Hamilton say if they came back here? This is obviously the in emergency break glass situation that they reserved impeachment for. One thing I know would have surprised them, they kind of envisioned a system with many different factions as opposed to the two-party system which has grown up and which they feared. And I think it's the actual existence of, these two warring parties who really only think in their own political standing that has made this such a crisis. Even the Dems are, not completely putting country above party. They're thinking about the political consequences. And so the one thing in the constitutional scheme that seems to have failed is this actual sort of two-party system. But for whatever reason, we really do have, you do got to think, just as you sort of said, if this is a situation where our legislators don't have the foresight and sense of responsibility to investigate what's happened and to take this with the gravity that it obviously deserves, then there's some really basic flaw in this ultimate safety valve that they left us, and that is the impeachment mechanism.
Harry, finally, for those of us waiting to hear from McGahn, from Barr, from Mueller, give an idea if, and I see no other reason to think there'll be a change of heart from the White House, that they'll continue to say, no, 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 make us. When would the courts, how fast-tracked would it be? When would we hear from these three people? And obviously you have the context of the 2020 election in November. How does this work? How fast does this move along? What's your estimate or sense if we'll hear from any or all of them?
Yeah, so you're totally right to ask those questions in a dual way. That is, it's who's right, who's got the legal advantage, but what about time? Because if it takes too long, as it has in the recent past with, say, Fast and Furious and Harriet Miers, it's no good for the Dems. In my view, the House has the advantage in all three of these situations, but time will, in fact, time is not on their side. But in my view, what'll happen, I think Mnuchin will be brought to heel in fairly quick order. That'll play out within 4 to 6 months, and the House will win, and they'll get the returns. I think we will hear Mueller and McGahn testify because I think the political forces are arrayed for that. I do not think we'll get However, McGahn's documents, the White House will fight and be able to play out the clock. And I also think they'll probably have to give up on Barr. So the question is always has to be how much time will it take, in addition to how strong is the view and how important is it. So I see them getting the taxes and hearing from McGahn and Mueller and probably abandoning or in practice losing the other battles.
Fascinating stuff. Harry, as always, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we're going to take a look at the 2020 race where we are now and how the fallout from the Mueller report can actually be a factor, maybe not in the ways you think.